Issues that will need understanding and therefore need assisting participants in addressing do have their roots in cultural and historical stories. Those oral histories passed on from people like themselves who experienced their own or the same or similar trauma and passed it on to others. Addressing these issues so that a man or a woman who has experienced a natural disaster, a personal trauma, a loss, or who is still grieving can encourage a person to own responsibility for how they experience the trauma and how they live each day with the memories of it. Taking personal responsibility will occur in the healing circle when a participant can learn to accept that the trauma is part of their history and they begin the process of healing themselves. They learn to let go. Healing circle is easy to identify a person's change of direction in their life. It begins when a person takes the first step toward their own healing. It continues when they approach someone seeking advice about participating in a healing journey. Participants learn that a life circumstance is something that they will encounter outside of themselves. A person becomes entangled in the circumstance and they begin to own the circumstance when they consent to allow their thinking or emotions to direct them in the circumstance. Another way of putting it is that a person is still a human being in any circumstance they are involved in during their lifetime. It is when we as humans take on ownership of the circumstance that challenges will arise. For example, when someone close to me dies in this circumstance, will I be the grieving person, feeling the loss and the pain for that person? Or in the circumstance of someone dying, will I be the person who actively goes through the grief, the pain, through the loss as I allow my memories of the person to be recalled? Will I go through the grief, celebrating the life of the person I have lost to death? There is a vast difference in how I approach the death of this someone in my life. And in Healing Circle, a participant is given tools to recognize where the circumstances of life have directed them rather than direct the issues to the circumstance of their life is challenging them to work through. The issues that need to be understood by participants and which have been highlighted by people who work with men and women who live the experience of being traumatized are dispossession and depression, intergenerational trauma, grief and loss, lateral violence and suicide, victimization, disenfranchisement, societal isolation and disempowerment, racism and biases faced by people after the natural disaster or other trauma they have experienced. Although the above issues are not unique to a population group, the cultural worldview about these issues is unique to the stories people tell after the disaster or trauma and their own experience of living through it. As a society, we often label people as survivors, victims, or some other label that assists society in making sense of the person and their circumstances. One of the significant stories people who have come through a traumatic event tell is one of being watched by agents of social institutions for many and varied reasons. The friendly, caring visit from a priest, a policeman, a neighbour, and a friend demonstrate that being under observation is part of what it means to be a person who survived. From police, courts, government and non-government agents, surviving a disaster or an event attracts some form of official observation. However, whilst the person may appreciate these contacts, hidden deep under the layers of the loss, the grief, the pain is that question, why? Disaster and trauma from violence, domestic violence, family violence, sexual, physical, mental, psychological and spiritual crime can be so challenging too. If a person believes and feels that what they are experiencing is their life being put on display by others, the trauma experience then takes the person down a pathway of distrust, panic, shame, fear, anxiety, grief, loss, uncontrollable shakings, and feelings of just wanting to hide. The help others give them can sometimes be overwhelming yet forbidding. However, if people who have suffered can come together and share their pain, listening to others tell their stories help them to see that the disaster, the trauma has always been outside of them. The pain has come from inside of them, from their reaction to what has been from outside of them. Their reaction is what brings the disaster or trauma into them, into their emotions, their thinking, and their spirit.